Yeah, I would like to introduce to you one of the most influential management thinkers worldwide, Professor Henry Mintzberg from McGill University, Montreal. Henry, thank you so much for discussing it with us. And please let me start with a personal remark. In the late 1980s, after some years in a lower management position in a non-profit organization, I did a master's in social sciences. Just by chance, I got hold of your 1973 book, The Nature of Managerial Work, and it was like a revelation for me. An author has written about what I have practiced for years. I've got a wonderful description from you of my muddling through practices, of trying to bring order to chaotic systems, and of my experience to handle with this high pressure environment. So my first question, to take an appropriate metaphor of for you approach from a German journalist, Dagmar Dickstein, she's called, is management a mission impossible?
Well, you actually made a slip which helps to answer the question. You said worldwide,
okay,
and not worldwide, but it is worldwide.
Pardon.
I think worldwide is a more accurate description of what's going on in the world. That makes management more difficult. We wouldn't have organizations that were functioning if management was impossible. So management is not impossible at all. I think management can be difficult under certain circumstances, and I also think that our perceptions of management make it difficult. In other words, it's not intrinsically difficult in some circumstances. We just bring a distorted view of it. And I think you want to get into some of that later, but sort of the MBA view of management, the shareholder value view of management, these things are very destructive of organizations. In fact, when management looks easy, it's probably least effective. I'm thinking of so-called downsizing, sitting in your office and firing 5,000 people. That's the easy way out. Or management, what I call management by deeming. I don't know if you have a word like that in German, but deeming means sort of pronouncing something. So you pronounce that you will cut costs by 10% or I'll fire you next year. That looks very easy, but it's very destructive of organizations.
Okay.
So the easiest management may be the worst.
First, let me ask you to your roots as a management thinker. You have an undergrad degree in mechanical engineering here at McGill, and you started your career at the Canadian National Railways, and there are not many management experts with an engineering background. As far as I know, Tom Peters is another relevant thinker with an engineering degree. When we follow your approach to define management in an area of conflict between craft, art and science, where was your personal starting point to management?
Well, in a way you could say I started with science. If you look at the one chapter of, I don't usually dislike anything I've written. Maybe it's ego or maybe, I don't know. But there's one chapter in The Nature of Managerial Work that talks about programming managerial work. And I, in a sense, I started with a tilt towards the analytical, scientific perspective in the sense that I was an engineer, I worked in operational research and so on, so I kind of tilted that way. But a turning point came, I think, when I published an article called Planning on the Left Side and Managing on the Right, which was quite early, 73 I think, and I had a debate in the in correspondence with Herbert Simon, who I had great respect for, who thought that what I was doing was bunk. I was basically arguing that between the analytic right hemisphere and the left hemisphere and the intuitive right hemisphere is some kind of secret to management practiced in a more intuitive way and management practiced in a more analytical way. And he thought that was bunk, and I had to decide in 24 hours, because the people at the Harvard Business Review wanted the article just when I received his letter, saying I had to decide whether I'd proceed with it. and I proceeded with it, I had to assume that Simon was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
In a field, namely psychology or cognitive psychology, where he was an expert. I didn't have particular knowledge in that field. I decided he was wrong, and once I made that decision, I think I tilted more strongly towards the art and the craft, especially the craft. I think management is significantly a craft. I think the art builds up the creative side and the strategy side and so on, but the craft is really the heart and soul of management, namely rooted in experience, learned through experience and so on. Even the art comes through craft in the sense that managers encourage other people to be creative, and then builds on that creativity. So managers don't have to be creative necessarily, but they have to be open to the creativity of others. In fact, they have to encourage the creativity of others and support it.
Yeah. You use sometimes a symbol for the wrong side of managing. You mentioned it in your first answer. I would call you are a prominent deconstructionist of the heroic manager. On a white horse, you said it once, who has masses of followers. Do they still exist? And why? And if so,
Do they
and
still
if so,
exist?
why? They still exist.
They've taken over. The narcissists are more numerous than ever.
Yeah.
And it's thanks to executive compensation. I mean, I'm equating narcissism with this heroic management. Anybody, I've said this many times, any chief executive who accepts to be paid several hundred times as much as the workers is not a leader. So there are almost no leaders among the Fortune 500. How many of them have said, don't pay me that way, you're destroying my ability to work with other people, because they look at me and say, is he worth or she worth 400 or 500 times what I'm worth? And we're inundated with those people now. The first thing someone does when they're taking a chief executive position, it appears, is worry about their own protection. First of all, their remuneration and their bonuses, their own protection. They're in positions where they're prepared to fire thousands of people at the drop of a share price. And in the meantime, they're writing in protections where they can walk out with several years of remuneration if they're fired early. So these people are not leaders; they're narcissists.
Okay.
And America is inundated with them. I was stunned when I learned at ING Bank in Holland that when the chief executive took a bonus of 1 million euros, which would have been laughable in the United States, it was a scandal. They would have laughed at that in the United States. They're walking off with tens of millions and more.
So, if they exist, and they do exist, there is another description of managing, let's say a post-heroic manager. Can you give some examples of, in the industry and maybe in other sectors of the society, of good examples for post-heroic managers?
Post-heroic meaning not heroic, or
not on a white horse, not all the the characteristics you mentioned.
Yeah, that's pre-heroic too. That's not only post-heroic.
Pre-heroic.
Can I give examples of that? Kofi, you have to know people closely, but Kofi Annan strikes me as an excellent example of that. And I've had some discussions with people in Ghana about the tribal elders and how they act, and how he's a good example of that. So he would be an example, of that kind of person. Someone who's quiet, low-key, thoughtful, solid.
We discussed, for example, in the German management discussions about the family-owned so-called hidden champions.
What's that?
Mittelstand companies. Are those companies maybe, and their management maybe an example of another way, another style?
Yeah, generally. You can never generalize about all, but yeah, generally. I think so, because there's much more commitment to the workforce. There's much more engagement by the managers themselves and the owners. So there's a much more intimate relationship in terms of sustainability. So they're not going to plunder the company for their own bonuses the
Yeah.
same way. So, with exceptions, one thing that worries me in the United States is early IPOs, where people build entrepreneurial companies that want to cash them out real quick. To make a lot of money, or look at what's happening in Facebook today, where they've got a lot of pressures, not because they necessarily have to have those pressures, but because they went public and there are expectations. So I think it's destructive of entrepreneurship. I never thought about it this way, but imagine if Steve Jobs had sold out when he, in this first round. Early on, we never would have had iPhones or iPads. He was kicked out and came back. But imagine if he sold out, cashed out, and so that's a trend that bothers me. I can't speak for the German stock market, but certainly for the American stock market, companies should do everything they can to stay out instead of being pressured by analysts who don't know an awful lot, short-term thinking. Stay away. Find other ways to fund yourself. Get patient capital.
Let's get into your approach since 40 years, we can say, since the nature of managerial work. You were the theorist and empirical person who found out that managers communicate. They communicate more than 3/4 of their time.
I think about half. But
half.
At least half. Yeah.
At least half.
Yeah.
And why good managers tend to, especially oral communication?
Because it's more flexible and it's deeper in a way. You've got tone of voice. How often have you received an email where you weren't sure if the person was angry or not? You sort of read it thinking, are they sounding off, or is this just the way they put it?
Yeah.
With voice, even on the telephone, you can tell instantly, and face to face, you can tell very quickly. Managers need that depth, and one thing I hate to do on email is schedule a meeting. How many times did we go back and forth? Well, I mean,
That's
we have
true.
changes. Especially when it's 3-4 people, because let's say if you move your 4 o'clock to 4:10 and I move my 5 o'clock to 5:15 and you do this and I do that, we can all meet. That would take 15 emails.
That's true.
And a 2-minute phone call, because you can sort of do. I just made a phone call and said, can we move to 5:15? And she said, yeah, I can do it, but I have to be finished by 6:40. And she said, I'll email the other guys coming to the meeting. Bang, done.
Yeah.
Start emails. If it's simple, it can be quick. If it's not, so oral communication has a lot more depth. Obviously, you can't handle the volume.
Yeah.
And you can't. I can't communicate with you when you're sleeping in Mannheim and I'm awake in Montreal. I can't do that on the phone. I have to email them.
And another point to your new book, Managing, you differentiate interpersonal, informational, and decisional roles of managing, and propagate for a well-rounded managing. Some management thinkers, as you mentioned, have emphasized one aspect of managing to the exclusion of the others. For example, Tom Peters' bias for action, Michael Porter's bias for analyzing. So too much of each can wear a manager down. Can any manager master all of this?
Well, all managers have to master them to some extent.
Yeah.
But managers can work in teams too, and have, you have a chief executive officer and chief operating officer working as a team, or whatever, and they can cover off different strengths. Entrepreneurs tend to be much more art, much more creative, much more flowery. They need sidekicks who are more analytical, more systematic, and so on. So a managerial team can be balanced, even if the individuals aren't balanced. You never want pure balance. It depends what you're doing. If you're running an advertising agency, you're going to be tilted towards much more creative activity. If you're running an insurance company, you're going to be much more careful and stable. I'd love to say that about banks, but that's what we need. Actually, Canada has banks like that still.
Okay.
I'm sure you do too.
Sure. Let us switch to another issue. You worked a lot on MBA, on management education, and you said once, no leader has ever created in a classroom. What is wrong with management education?
Well, for starters, it's not management education; it's business education.
Yeah, yeah.
The MBA is about business administration. It's not about management. There's very little management in it. And finance and marketing and accounting all added together do not make management.
Mm-hmm.
Management people manage those functions, have to understand those functions if they're in business, but that's not management.
Okay.
You have to. It's part of understanding management, but it's not management any more than understanding the behavior of tourists is part of Club Med's management. You have to understand the behavior of tourists to be a manager at Club Med, but that's not management. It's an input and knowledge for management. So people have to understand. But the more serious problem is that where MBA programs do try to teach management through case studies, and we're only talking now about people who have no managerial experience, where they do try and teach management through case studies, they give a very distorted, artificial view of what management is, because you're handed 20 nice, neat pages. You read them the day before, you know nothing about the company, you don't know its history, you don't know its culture, other than a few words in the case. You don't know the people, you don't know the products, and suddenly you're forced to comment in class. If you refuse to comment, you're kicked out of the program. Mm-hmm. That's very, very superficial. Mm-hmm. It's a very superficial way to understand management. And then we build executive, so-called, never met an executive in an executive MBA program, but we build executive MBA programs. And then we boast, as Wharton has on its site, we boast that you get the same thing in the EMBA that you get in the MBA. In other words, we're boasting that we take you with years of managerial experience and we can do no more for you than people who have no managerial experience. That shows where MBA programs are at with regard to the practice of management.
Okay. When we have this inflation of MBA programs and all around the world, for example, the first MBA program in Europe started in 1960s. I don't know. We have thousands about in Europe and all over the world.
But you don't have nearly proportionally what the U.S. does, I assume.
I guess no. But okay,
there's still hope for you.
Yeah.
If you're smart enough to avoid that trap.
Why is it so dangerous for a society to have such a great number of MBA students and alumni that already get into the industry, into the private companies or the public sector?
But in Germany you have a history of promoting people through the functions.
Yeah.
They really, really know those functions. They know that business from that point of view really well. The premise of the MBA program, since management is supposedly taught out of context, in other words, you're not taught an MBA for airlines or for banking or for healthcare. Well, healthcare there are some, but generally you're taught to manage anything. Mm-hmm. And if you leave the program thinking you can manage anything, you're prepared to manage nothing, because you've got to get in depth and understand the nature of the industry, the nature of the company, the history. You really have to understand that deeply. Mm-hmm. And MBAs think they can just kind of flit in and not fit in, but flit in.
What would be the danger for a society if we have such a big number of MBA of the MBA?
Because you have so many people prepared to kind of manage anything, and they become a kind of elite, which undermines the people in the organization or the company or the industry who really know it. Mm-hmm. And you're creating a business class. A business class is not just a place in an airplane. It's a class of people who think they have some God-given right to manage those companies, and it's not healthy for society. People should know their industries, know their businesses, build up that way, or entrepreneurs create new enterprises and so on. It's amazing how well Germany does with, I guess, the highest wage rates in the world, eh? Would that be, or certainly close to it in Germany? The wage rates, the salaries for workers.
Yes, we have one of the highest in the
Yeah,
world,
it's
that's true.
It probably is the highest, or very close to it for a big country.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet your economy has been doing generally
Quite well, yeah.
quite
sure.
well.
Yeah.
And that says a lot for many things. It says a lot for pride, it says a lot for respect of workers,
Mm-hmm.
it says a lot for the nature of management and the background of managers, it says a lot for the culture of the organizations,
Mm-hmm.
the companies, and so on. All the things that are on the decline in the United States, all of them.
You here at McGill, you have a different approach of your management programs. You have, for example, the International Masters in Practicing Managers. For example, by reflecting in small groups their own experiences. What is your approach at your programs that you start in the recent years?
Well, there are a number of fundamental things. Some are not different, but the key ones are. What's not different is that we have programs. These are programs for practicing managers who come in temporarily. Well, the EMBA programs do that too, but that's where we part company, because the assumption in almost all management programs or MBA programs is that you learn by learning theory and by doing cases. Both are based on other people's experiences, not yours. Theory is built from digested experience, and cases are built based on other people's experience. It's great to learn from other people's experience, but it's much more powerful to learn from your own experience, to reflect on your own experience. So what we do is we sit our managers at round tables like this in a flat room, so they can go in and out of workshops, and we have all day long, and we have what we call a 50-50 rule, that half the time it's over to them on their agenda, not our agenda as professors. Very hard to shut the professors up, but very important to shut the professors up and turn it over to the participants when they have experience and they know what they're doing. And then they they reflect on their experience. Personally, they share it with each other, and they learn in light of those theories and cases sometimes, not much, but cases. And they learn in light of those inputs, those conceptual inputs or workshops or exercises or whatever it is, but they're learning based on, look, I had a problem last week, and this is how I dealt with it, and a colleague says, well, I've had that kind of problem, this is how I dealt with it, and then they're listening to the professor talking about how, in general, people deal with these problems. And all of that is a stew that mixes together and creates insight in the classroom. People walk into our classrooms, and the excitement and the insight is startling, as opposed to a bunch of people discussing a case or listening to a lecture. I mean, we lecture too, obviously, but the insights are startling, and we would typically have from 3 to 7 professors in that class, and we're not paying them all because people are dropping in, they're excited, they want to know what's happening, they were there yesterday, they want to see what's happening today, they're coming tomorrow, they want to see what the class looks like, or they're just curious, or they like the discussion. So people are coming and going all the time. I never had a second professor in any of my classrooms before I started with these programs.
Team teaching.
Have you ever had a colleague in a classroom?
Seldomly. I did it before my time as a professor in the adult training.
That's different.
That's different. Yeah.
Because that's closer to what we're doing.
Yeah. So my last question: if you reflect your role as a management thinker, and as we mentioned in one of the earlier your earlier answers, I interpret your approach a little bit like in your new book, Managing, about balancing, for example, craft, art, and science. How do you reflect your role as a management thinker?
Whether I'm balanced?
What is your approach? Are you
my art, craft, or science?
Yeah.
We have a little exercise in there where you can we just did it ourselves, it's a little thing. To tabulate yourself. I come out strongest on art and next on craft. Most of the professors in the
IMPM and the healthcare version, the International Masters for Health Leadership, come out strong on art, strong on craft, weaker on analysis. But some, in the healthcare program, for example, we do sessions on evidence-based healthcare, and comparing it with evidence-based management, and so we get people who have a stronger analytical bent. Some people like that, but we tend to be art craft, and I'm more strong on art, which means ideas, not art. I don't do art. I guess I collect beaver sculptures, but art meaning ideas, insights, visions.
Okay, Professor Mintzberg, thank you so much.
All right.
It was
We
nice to
still
talk
have
to you.
time if you.